Good afternoon. If you are tuned to Channel 2 for the Timbercrest Chat, we'll be beginning in about 3 minutes. The Timbercrest Chat begins in about 3 minutes. Thank you. We have about 1 minute before the Timbercrest Chat starts. If you're watching on Channel 2, like I said, we'll be beginning in just about a minute. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's time for the Timbercrest Chat, and I'll be standing during most of today's program. Today isn't an interview. It's, if you will, it's a little bit of a Timbercrest history lesson. And I may be cut off. I can't see myself on the picture, but I may be cut off a little bit. But I tried to zero in as well as I could on this large picture of the Timbercrest campus. And what we'll be doing is looking at a little bit of the history of how Timbercrest grew and developed, talking about some important people that were involved with the settlement or the establishment of Timbercrest and the building of it over the years, and hopefully provide a little bit of a way for us to remember how important it is community life has always been and how important community life still is at Timbercrest. Before I begin, I just want to share just a couple of announcements with you. First and foremost, even though my mask is on the chair behind me here, just a reminder, especially during this time of restriction, we want to make sure that everybody's wearing their masks. And I'm as guilty as anybody. The other day, I had been drinking coffee at my desk and got called up to the front. And sure enough, I got up and took off, and I was all the way to the front desk before anybody noticed that I didn't have my mask on. But please make sure, don't do what I do. Do what I say, don't do what I do. Be sure you're wearing your mask around campus when you come across people and in the corridors of the manor and that sort of thing. Just make sure that that's going on. Your Timberline calendar has pretty much everything in it that you need to know as far as things that are coming up and events. We're getting some good feedback about the exercise classes that are at 9:30 on every morning at 9:30 on Channel 2. And Rhonda has found a couple of videos on chair yoga. Nothing on chair tai chi yet, but look for those to be coming in the next week or two as well. So as I said, you want to turn into Channel 2 for exercise at 9:30. We're talking about a couple other things possible for Channel 2 while we're during this shutdown time. And of course, we always want Timbercrest to be a living community, and hopefully doing these things by video and that will be short-lived, and we'll be back to normal fairly soon. We are going, just for your information, that due to the county's positivity rate for coronavirus tests, we are moving our employees to twice a week testing. That is every Tuesday and every Friday. And then you'll be receiving a memo from Christy tomorrow in Campus Mail talking about adjustments that are being made for the schedule for people who live at Timbercrest and being tested every week until the county's positivity rate goes down again, which it will. I mean, those things, it's just like any other disease. It fluxes up, it fluxes down. It is important, though, to remember that there are people who are not, they're flouting the rules, basically. This morning I did shopping for Timbercrest down at Walmart in Wabash, and many of the people that were in the Wabash Walmart store, even though there are signs everywhere to say wear your mask, there are many people out in the community who are not wearing their masks. So the whole idea of the fluctuation of the curve and that depends on how well we cooperate and do what is necessary. Just, you may not know this yet, but there are two school systems right next to them, and McConaughey, which is basically the South Miami school system. Both of those school systems are closed until after Thanksgiving due to outbreaks of coronavirus. So we want you to make sure to be careful and be cautious. And trust me, I don't like the shutdown or the restrictions any more than anybody else does. I don't like what it's doing to us as a family here at Timbercrest when it comes to social dynamics, but I know that it's helping us to prevent something worse, the virus and the things that could happen if we have an outbreak, a serious outbreak here. The state of Indiana considers one case to be an outbreak, which seems a little dramatic to me. We don't have any resident cases now. We have a couple of staff who have been dealing with it, but they'll be off of it fairly soon. I don't want to minimize it. At the same time, we should be very grateful that we don't have it worse than we do. On to the program, if I can say that. I know that this is the largest picture of Timbercrest that I could find, and there wasn't any way for me to get it onto a slide so we can make it even bigger. And so, like I said at the beginning, I may be cut off here at the top. I can't really tell, and here at the side, but I'm not the main thing I want you to see today. This is an aerial map of Timbercrest taken sometime before Chestnut Court was built. And the way we know that is if you look over here in the corner, you can see a little bit of a green area that used to be our Timbercrest orchard. The orchard was maintained by a committee, just like there was a garden committee. And this brown streak right here is where the Timbercrest garden used to be. Now the Timbercrest garden is over here towards Shank Creek, takes up a good deal of that field right there. But the orchard was right there. And now we have, of course, beautiful homes there on Chestnut Court that way. Leo Metzger's brother, Morris, was the last chairman of the garden committee. The orchard committee, and Morris was one who worked his hardest to keep the orchard going, but it just became too much. It was just too much work to maintain the trees and that. And at that time, when we had apples from the orchard, of course, we gave a lot of apples away to employees and people who live here, but Nadine Bowman lived at Timbercrest, and many of you may remember Nadine. She was she never slept, I don't think. She constantly worked all the time. And Nadine would take apples from the Timbercrest orchard and make homemade apple dumplings every year. And it was quite a thing. Back in those days, the state didn't have regulations on the kitchen. They did, but not to the point that we do now. But at that time, we could bring in our own apples. And as I said, Nadine just spent hours in our Timbercrest kitchen, in the Rose Garden kitchen, making apple dumplings. We had apple dumplings right here from our own orchard right here. So this picture isn't the newest because it doesn't include Orchard Lane. It doesn't include Chestnut Court, and it doesn't include these two buildings here, these two homes here on Hickory Lane that are there. So it's a little bit dated. However, it's the biggest one we have. And I thought that would be good to have the biggest one we have for the sake of getting it on the camera and making sure everybody could see it okay. What I plan to do today is simply take a walk around the Timbercrest campus and the Timbercrest building here, and just to give a little bit of the history of Timbercrest, of who we are and why we do what we do and how we're laid out, and how what we do and how we are laid out reflects our identity as a community. And I think that's just so very important for us. Of course, the main entrance of Timbercrest is right here in the front. This is East Street here. The main entrance is right here. And many people call it the front entrance. A lot of people do, and I often call it the front entrance too. But there was always a concerted effort to say that this was the main entrance. And when we got signs for the fire department, you'll see at the main entrances, you'll see numbers, and you'll see some signs for the fire department so that they know where to go if there's a problem. It says main entrance. And that has always been a conscientious effort, because it was hard to say what is the front of Timbercrest. And this may sound odd, but it reflects one of our values, that no particular part of Timbercrest is more important than the other. And you associate the front of a building with kind of the more important, the grand portico, the main place to go. Well, if you live down here by the assembly room, here's the assembly room, and this entrance back here at the hub, you might be tempted to say, well, that's the front entrance, because that's where, you know, most people come in. And sorry for the technical problem. You might be tempted to say, well, this is where most people come in. Well, so that should be the front entrance. Well, actually, this is the hub. This is the main entrance. And let's say you come in at healthcare. Is that more important than this? No, everything is equal. Everyone is as important as the next. So this is the main entrance of Timbercrest. And I'd encourage you sometime to go take a look at the plaque that's inside the main entrance. It lists a very committed and dedicated group of people who built Timbercrest, who were on the board of directors, either when we were still at the Mexico home and through the transition to Timbercrest in 1968, or they served on the first or the initial board when Timbercrest was entirely here on campus. Many of those people have lived at Timbercrest, and it shows the value of what they believed in what they were doing. They believed in the mission of Timbercrest enough that when it came their time, they moved in. And a lot of them moved here and still lived there, or lived here in their retirement. If you come into Timbercrest here at the main entrance, of course, this hallway here is A Street, used to be called A Wing. A Wing is here, and now A Street goes all the way down here to the hub. This was intentionally built as a non-residential area. There are no resident apartments on A Street. It was designed to make it so that as little as possible, where people live at Timbercrest wouldn't be interfered by the traffic of everyday life. A Wing is here, and this is B Wing right here. So this is where the main part of the traffic goes. We're going to talk about the library in a little bit. When you come into the main entrance at Timbercrest, you come into a beautiful, well-appointed room with a fireplace and nice lighting and that sort of thing. And the furniture has changed over the years. Even in the time that I've been here, it's changed out twice. But just past that, you go past the receptionist desk, and to the left, there's a women's restroom. And no disrespect intended to spiritual life, but where that women's restroom was the first actual Timbercrest chapel. It was after this chapel that I'm in right now, after this chapel was built, that room became an office. It served well for several different purposes. At a time, there was a clinic, a nurses' clinic in the front. It served as a clinic for the nurses. It served as an office for program and services. And then those restrooms at the front were remodeled so that the men's room is now on the west side of the corridor, and the women's is on the east. And most of that women's room space is taken up by what used to be the Timbercrest Chapel. It's interesting, for those of you who eat in the Rose Garden dining room, If you go to the back corner of the Rose Garden dining room, you'll see two wooden doors. Those wooden doors don't go anywhere because the wall for the women's room is right there. But those doors used to be open, and people would go into the Timbercrest Chapel for quiet time and prayer. The chapel services at that time then were conducted in that end of the Rose Garden dining room. The Rose Garden dining room, again, if you come in, the main entrance is right here in the building. It's called the Rose Garden because at one time there was a rose garden here in the courtyard between the Rose Garden dining room and F Wing. This used to have a very beautiful rose garden, but like many other things, roses are hard to maintain. They were a lot of work, and eventually the volunteers who tended the roses found that they just couldn't keep up with them. Daryl Snyder used to be one of the ones who maintained the roses. Mary and Don Ritchie helped maintain the roses, but again, roses are a lot of work, and so it was finally decided that even though we still call this the Rose Garden dining room, the garden has been supplanted by things that are easier to maintain. So you go into that Rose Garden dining room, and as I said, you see these double doors that don't go anywhere. Now, that's where the chapel was, and devotions every morning, that we've always had devotions in the morning here, were in that west side of the Rose Garden dining room. And that's where they kept having their services. That's a carryover from the Mexico home. At morning breakfast over in the Mexico home every day, they sang a hymn, they had devotional reading, and someone led them in prayer. That was just their tradition and their routine, reflecting the pietist heritage of the Church of the Brethren. Back in Mexico, you almost had to belong to the Church of the Brethren, in order to live there. When that transition was made to here, it's been a long time coming. Now only about 50% of the people here belong to the Church of the Brethren. But at the time, far and away, most people still had their devotions of a morning and had them together there in the Rose Garden dining room. Just as a point of interest, this chapel that I'm speaking to you from now was built in 1974. And back in 2014, we had a 40th anniversary celebration here in the chapel. And the chapel was full of things, full of people, and people remembering how great it was to finally build a chapel like this. As you continue on A Street, part of the reason that there's no people who live on A Street is because it's always been more of a utility hub. And right in here is the food service hub, basically. It's access to the Timbercrest dock. It's an interesting thing to go to the dock, not because it's dirty and it's industrial a little bit and that sort of thing, but it's important for us to see, or for anybody to see, that it takes a lot of material, a lot of food, a lot of healthcare supplies, a lot of furniture, a lot of maintenance supplies, a lot of things to keep Timbercrest going. So I would encourage you sometime to just stick your nose around the dock over here. Just take a look and see, especially on a Tuesday or a Friday when the big trucks come in, but every day there are shipments that come into Timbercrest that are checked in at that dock, and it's just something to see. That's there. I've mentioned B Wing, which is this little wing here that sticks out into the courtyard. Otherwise, the courtyard's a pretty straight up pentagon. But right here is B Wing. And a lot of people are familiar with Timbercrest, know that used to be the healthcare wing. This, where my office is right here on B Wing, was a healthcare room. People lived in the healthcare room, and then the lounge down in the middle of B Wing used to be the healthcare dining room, and they just that met the needs of Timbercrest at the time. Obviously, it's far too small to meet the needs of the people who live at Timbercrest now. But I've talked again to many people who have lived in the apartment where I work, or they've lived in some other apartments there on B Wing, to say, yeah, my mom or my dad or my grandparents or somebody were in here when this was healthcare. And I think that's a fun thing to know. The last person to actually live in the office, or the room that's now my office, was Mary France. Frank and Mary France's daughter was Doris Schambarger, who recently died here at Timbercrest. But Frank and Mary France lived in that apartment, and then Frank moved to healthcare, and Mary lived there for another few years before she moved to healthcare. And Frank and Mary were Old Order German Baptists. And so, or Old German Baptist Brethren, I guess that's the correct way to say it. They were Old German Baptist Brethren. And one of the reasons that they didn't mind having that apartment was the TV reception in there is terrible. And being Old Order or Old German Baptist Brethren, they didn't care about the TV reception. That didn't matter to them at all. They just liked having the view out there. And so that was a perfect apartment for them. Going around the circle here at Timbercrest, we'll just take a look here. This is A wing, this is B, this is C wing right in here, and C wing is actually just this half here, is the shortest residential wing, and right now there's only 3 apartments there on C wing. As the needs for Timbercrest have changed, so the needs have grown, the office, which used to only be right around the reception desk here, has had to expand. Stan Knopfsinger, our CEO, his office is on C wing now. Mary Beth Gast, who's the director of housing services, her office is on C wing now. Our human resources office is there. Our human resources coordinator, Hillary Wagner, her office is in C wing, and so is the financial services office. So the needs of Timbercrest have grown as the population of Timbercrest has grown. So more and more of C wing has become business-like, and as I said, there's only 3 resident apartments there. The actual oldest residential wing at Timbercrest is this wing right here, and this is D wing. This is the oldest part of Timbercrest where people have lived. And D wing was, like I said, kind of the place to be. A lot of people who moved to Timbercrest, especially from Mexico, felt like they had really moved to heaven, that compared to the quarters that were there at the Mexico home, Timbercrest was just top flight. There was no way they could beat it. And so these people that lived on D wing really had it made. They had a beautiful view of the sunset. In those days, they had a beautiful view out east towards the sunrise. And as the campus has grown, obviously they've given up a little bit of that, but they still have a beautiful courtyard to look at. For a long, long time, for many, many years, there was an organ in the lounge at D wing, and people used to go in and play the organ. Back when we had organists moving to Timbercrest, they would go into that lounge and play the organ, and eventually that died out. People began not playing the organ, and so that organ was sold to the what was at the time Liberty Mills United Methodist Church, and now I believe it's just Liberty Mills Community Church. But that's where that organ from D wing is now. Continuing on a little bit of the history, E wing is here and F wing is here, and those 2 wings are now all what used to be called congregate living. Now that's option plan apartments, and that's a very popular way of life here at Timbercrest. Often when I'm in the community or I'm talking to people and they say, well, what is Timbercrest like? What do you expect when you move in? And literally, the neighborhood homes are nice. They're like mostly duplexes or quadruplex condos. They're very nice facilities there, very beautiful apartments, beautiful homes, beautiful landscaping. And it's easy to talk about that one, but when people say, what about inside the manor? What about inside the main building? Well, I tell them, you know, Timbercrest is virtually any option that you want in a place, you can get it at Timbercrest. These apartments along here are some of the first where we experimented with 2 or 3 room apartments. There's some of the first rooms and places where we put in full kitchens and full laundries. That was part of the plan to keep up Timbercrest with the times. And that's still an important way to do that, important thing for us to have here at Timbercrest. This setup here, these wings right in through here, were the first places that growth really occurred here at Timbercrest. And then the first expansion wing of this Pentagon here was G wing. there's a lawyer in town. He's not here anymore, but he lived at Timbercrest. He was a trustee at Timbercrest in the 60s. Bill Daggett said that Timbercrest couldn't afford to sit and be stagnant. Timbercrest needed to be forward-looking. It needed to be a place where people would look forward to moving in, but also with facilities and with accoutrements that would be appealing to the next generation of people. So Bill led the drive to get G-Wing started here and to continue to have lounges in each wing. And most wings still have a lounge today. Those lounges have a kitchenette. They have two-sided facilities so that guests could stay there in the night. Because again, Bill Daggett was a man who had a sense of vision of what Timbercrest could be. And he's one of the ones who said, you know, if you're living in a small studio or a deluxe size apartment, you may not have room in your place to host your guests. But here we've got a lounge, or we've got most wings have a lounge where they can come and they can stay and they can be comfortable, enjoy your company. I've already talked about the Timbercrest Chapel. That's this building right here. And the picture doesn't have the new roof that's on top here. About 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago by now, we were having a leakage problem in the Timbercrest Chapel. And if you come into the chapel, if you look at the wall towards the fireplace and on the east wall of the chapel, you can still see some watermarks, damage from that water that kept leaking in, and it was always a problem. And so the decision was made to go up and create a roof. So when you walk into the Timbercrest Chapel, you're not seeing, when you look at the ceiling, you're not seeing the bottom of the roof. There's another whole story above there that's basically used for some storage, but basically it's empty space that's up there. Here in the chapel, we have a piano over here. You hear that played most days for the daily chapel services. That was donated to Timbercrest by Dottie Snyder. Dottie still lives at Timbercrest in healthcare, and she's a wonderful person. And she's just, every time I talk to her about playing the piano in the chapel, she's just delighted that it's getting some good use. The organ, which is over here that you can't see either the piano or the organ on the camera, was donated to Timbercrest by Richard Livingston. The organ that it replaced was a very beautiful organ as well, but this one had some features that contemporary organists were more interested in, and so this organ given by Richard Livingston has been part of the history of Timbercrest. Timbercrest began to grow in the 70s, and in 1972, after G-Wing, that came this wing here, H-Wing. And also in 1972, things began to grow out on the campus as well. This horseshoe drive here is Oak Drive, and this is the oldest street of our independent living apartments. And that was a very forward-thinking thing at the time as well. Some very wealthy communities had independent living, and there was some apprehension about whether or not Timbercrest ought to do something like that. However, we found that Timbercrest is right in the middle of the market, if I can put it that way. You don't have to be wealthy to live at Timbercrest. You have to have planned your retirement. You have to plan your finances pretty well. But the whole aim of these independent apartments, the independent living, the neighborhood homes like this, has been if the average middle income person, we used to say, Dave Lorenz used to say that if you were a retired teacher, you ought to be able to afford to live in one of these neighborhood homes. And that's kind of where we're at. The average middle income retiree can afford to live in one of these neighborhood homes if they've made the plans for it. After H-Wing was built, there was no more additional work done to the rest of the manor for 13 years because the expansion of Timbercrest began here on Oak Drive, and then it went to what this little street here is called Spruce Lane, expanded then on to what we call Willow Way, right over in here. So that growth took place, and so no more additional growth really happened here in the manor. For, like I said, for almost 13 years. Then, in 1985, expansion began again. things began to go, and this wing that you can only see part of it was J and K wing, sticking off here or that's I wing. I'm sorry. This is H wing, G H. This is I, J. This is J wing here. Sorry about that. I should know my alphabet better. I should know my alphabet better. J wing was the first wing to be built in 13 years, built in 1985, and this is where the expansion to make the whole circle really became important. It grew through the support, again, and the vision of the Church of the Brethren, largely the Church of the Brethren in Indiana, to say our ministry to senior adults is an important part of who we are. So the expansion grew. J wing was built. I wing was built a little bit later. K and L wings were built in 1989, and M wing. This is called the years of the Great Expansion, where the whole place grew. Healthcare was added on, so that by 1989 there was healthcare. There was A Street was completed the whole way around here, and in 1989 this building, the assembly room, was finished. And the part of the building of the assembly room was, the purpose of that was so that everybody who lived on campus could be in one place at one time. That's still an important value to us, even though the building or the room is a little too small for that right now. Back in the days when we used to have Auxiliary Day, when we had Friends of Timbercrest Day, we'd have 275 people, 300 people in the assembly room, and it's a very tight fit. There have been times when we've had 225 or 250 people at our Christmas party, and I think, how on earth did we ever get that many people into the assembly room for those auxiliary days? But that was the idea of the assembly room, that it's a place where the entire community at Timbercrest could assemble. O wing is the last wing of that great expansion I talked about, and that's right over here. And at one time, O wing went all the way back to what healthcare is now. As things have changed, as the needs have developed, though, Timbercrest, this entire cross-shaped area here is now all healthcare. A little bit of it is still O-wing, but it's all healthcare. And this picture doesn't picture, of course, the addition here that is now Crestwood, where the Crestwood residential living area is. It's important for us to remember who we are and why we're here on campus. It's easy to think that Timbercrest is defined by the events that began in March with the shutdown for the pandemic, and that we're constantly just in a state of lockdown. And it's easy for us to think, boy, when are we ever going to get back to these good old days? Well, I don't have an answer for when we're going to get back to the good old days, but I have full confidence that we will get back to those good old days. I have full confidence that the spirit that built Timbercrest the way it is now, the spirit that built Timbercrest to make it into a community, to make it into a family, is still here. One of the, I guess you might say it's anecdotal evidence, but I think it's true evidence. It happened last Friday. We had a beautiful day coming. We did a spur-of-the-moment thing with snickerdoodles. It was just for people who lived in the manor. So if you're in a neighborhood home, I'm sorry that you weren't able to participate in that. But we just wanted to get people out and get out in the sunshine, enjoy the good weather that we had a week ago. And sitting there and talking with people, listening to music, it felt like Timbercrest. It felt like, people were laughing together and talking together and just having a great time. Everybody was in masks and most people were 6 feet apart. But that spirit has been latent for months. I mean, we've been really put in a bind about the way we can do some things. But I believe that the spirit of Timbercrest that built Timbercrest to be a community is still here. And I'm looking forward to the day when things get back to normal. And sometimes people say, this is the new normal. Well, I refuse to accept that. The new normal is distant and it's sterile and it's impersonal and it's with face masks. I believe we'll get back to a normal that's very personal. I believe we'll get back to a normal where people can care about each other, when people can walk in the hallways at Timbercrest or sit holding hands and expressing their care for one another. I believe that we'll get back to that, because that is what built us in the first place. A sense of care and family and community and love for one another that makes all the difference in who we are. So I hope you've enjoyed this little history lesson of Timbercrest. Each of these streets has a unique history of its own. When they were built, they've kind of just been tagging along here as time went on. But the main heart of Timbercrest isn't the building. It's not the assembly room. It's not the wings. It's not the neighborhood homes. The main heart of Timbercrest is in the heart of the people who live here and the heart of people who work here. And as I said, I think that makes all the difference. So thank you for listening to my little chat, and have a good afternoon. I got to turn the speaker off.